The Atlantic Ocean is often imagined as a vast, open expanse of water separating continents, a blue distance between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. Yet scattered across its surface are lands that interrupt, define, and animate it. The islands of the Atlantic Ocean form a sprawling, intricate world of ice and fire, coral and cliff, exile and empire, biodiversity and resilience. To tell their story as one continuous narrative is to trace not only geography but geology, climate, migration, conquest, adaptation, and imagination. From the Arctic margins to the threshold of Antarctica, from continental fragments to newborn volcanic rock, the Atlantic's islands are the ocean's living architecture. Atlantic islands comprise the Canaries, Madeira, Azores, and Cape Verde Islands, beach resorts, volcanoes, rugged scenery and even desert, all off the west coast of Africa. The Canaries are a popular cruise area, particularly in winter, offering a warm African climate with a European ambience. Further out into the Atlantic Ocean are the mountainous Azores. Further south and 400 miles off the west coast of Senegal are the Cape Verde Islands, and in the South Atlantic you will find St. Helena and Ascension Island, all hosts to cruise ships. Canaries and Madeira. The 7 Canary Islands are scattered some 70 miles off the coast of Morocco. Gran Canaria offers busy resorts, impressive architecture and a mini-Sahara, while Tenerife has mountainous rainforests and great beaches. Lanzarote features moon-like landscapes in its Fire Mountain Volcanic Park and is close to the semi-desert Fuerteventura with its extensive sandy beaches. Further out into the Atlantic are the unspoilt mountainous volcanic islands of La Palma, La Gomera, and El Hierro. Green and mountainous Madeira, 250 miles to the north, has its capital Funchal to entertain you with its maze of winding cobbled streets and traditional sled rides down the steep streets. Cruises to the Canaries and Madeira can be taken from the UK or Mediterranean ports like Genoa either as return voyages of 7 to 14 days or as a sector of a transatlantic voyage. There are also cruises around the islands leaving from Tenerife or Gran Canaria. Azores and Cape Verde Islands. The 9 islands of the Azores, discovered by the Portuguese and long a haven for voyages between the Old and New Worlds, feature craters, lakes, sheer cliffs, and lush valleys. The Cape Verde Islands are also a mountainous volcanic archipelago with attractive towns and old Portuguese colonial buildings. Mainly staging posts on transatlantic cruises, there are occasional round-trip cruises from Western Europe. South Atlantic Islands. The tiny remote islands of St. Helena and Ascension are set in the tropical South Atlantic, 1,500 miles and 2,200 miles northwest of Cape Town, midway between Africa and South America. World cruises will sometimes call as they travel north or south, and there are some cruises leaving and returning to Cape Town that visit the islands. At the northern edge of the Atlantic rises, immense and austere, its ice sheet gleaming under polar light. Though often associated with the Arctic, Greenland's southeastern and southwestern coasts open directly into the North Atlantic. Its glaciers calve icebergs that drift southward, its meltwater influences ocean salinity, and its position shapes atmospheric circulation. The island's Inuit communities developed lifeways attuned to sea ice and marine mammals, while Norse settlers once established medieval colonies along its southwestern fjords. Today Greenland stands at the intersection of climate science and geopolitics, its melting ice both a warning and a driver of global transformation. East of Greenland, straddling the mid-Atlantic ridge, lies a land literally being pulled apart as the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates diverge. Volcanoes, geysers, lava plains, and glaciers coexist in a dramatic landscape forged by subterranean fire and Arctic air. Settled by Norse voyagers in the 9th century, Iceland became a node in a North Atlantic network linking Scandinavia, the British Isles, Greenland, and briefly North America. Its sagas preserve the memory of ocean crossings that transformed the Atlantic from barrier to highway. Between Iceland and Scotland stand the wind-scoured cliffs of their basalt plateaus rising steeply from cold Atlantic waters. These islands, too, were shaped by Norse expansion, their language and traditions enduring across centuries of Danish governance. they are reminders that even small archipelagos can sustain distinct identities when surrounded by restless seas. Southward, the Atlantic meets the great continental fragments that form the British Isles, and stand as continental islands, once connected to mainland Europe but separated by rising seas after the last ice age. Their western coasts face directly into Atlantic storms, and their histories have been inseparable from maritime expansion. From these shores sailed vessels that would establish colonies across the ocean, reshaping global demography and economy. Smaller archipelagos such as Orkney and Shetland extend into the North Atlantic, their Norse heritage echoing the seafaring routes that once connected Scandinavia to Greenland. Further into the northeastern Atlantic lies the solitary island of Jan Mayen, volcanic and remote, rising between Iceland and Norway. Dominated by the Berenberg volcano, it stands as a stark sentinel in cold waters. Nearby, tiny outcrops like Rockall illustrate how even the smallest protrusion of land can hold legal and geopolitical significance in defining maritime boundaries. Moving south into milder latitudes, the Atlantic reveals volcanic archipelagos born of tectonic fracture and hotspot activity. They emerge roughly midway between Europe and North America, 9 islands of crater lakes, hydrangea-lined roads, and geothermal steam. For centuries, they served as stepping stones for ships crossing the ocean. South of them, rises steeply from deep water, its terraced hillsides and laurel forests reflecting both natural abundance and centuries of cultivation. Off the northwest coast of Africa stand the, volcanic in origin and diverse in terrain. Tenerife's mount tide towers above clouds, while Lanzarote's lava fields recall the island's fiery birth. The Guanche people inhabited these islands before Spanish conquest, after which the Canaries became a launching point for voyages to the Americas. Farther south, the island nation of rises from Atlantic waters, its volcanic landscapes and Creole culture shaped by centuries of Portuguese influence and transatlantic exchange. Westward across the ocean, Limestone Cap stands alone in the Sargasso Sea, surrounded by coral reefs and warmed by the Gulf Stream. Though small, Bermuda's position made it strategically vital for naval operations and transatlantic communication. It embodies a recurring Atlantic theme: size does not determine significance. The Atlantic broadens into the Caribbean basin, where an arc of islands forms a boundary between open ocean and enclosed sea. Stretches long and mountainous at the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico. Shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic, was among the first footholds of European colonization in the Americas. Mountainous and lush, became a center of plantation slavery and later a cradle of global music and culture. Sits at the gateway between the Caribbean and the open Atlantic, its political status reflecting layered histories of empire. North of Cuba lies the sprawling archipelago of hundreds of low-lying coral islands resting on shallow banks. These islands were among the first encountered by Columbus and have long been shaped by maritime navigation, piracy, tourism, and vulnerability to storms. East and south arcs the Lesser Antilles, where volcanic peaks alternate with coral platforms. Stands slightly apart, its limestone geology distinct from its volcanic neighbors. At the southern end of the arc, lies near the South American mainland, blending continental geology with insular identity. Across the Caribbean, colonial legacies endure in overseas territories and departments. French islands like Guadeloupe and Martinique remain integrated with France, Dutch islands such as Aruba and Curaçao maintain ties to the Netherlands, British territories like the Cayman Islands and Turks and Caicos reflect ongoing imperial relationships. The Caribbean islands became crucibles of the Atlantic slave trade, plantation economies, resistance movements, and Creole cultures that transformed global music, religion, language, and cuisine. Along the American mainland's Atlantic edge stretch barrier islands such as Long Island and the Outer Banks, shaped by glacial deposits and sediment drift. Though often overlooked in grand oceanic narratives, they are fully Atlantic in orientation, vulnerable to hurricanes and rising seas. In Canada, Newfoundland stands at the meeting point of cold and warm currents, its Grand Banks once among the richest fisheries on Earth. In the Equatorial Atlantic, volcanic islands rise from deep water. São Tomé and Príncipe, lush and mountainous, reflect Portuguese colonial history and plantation economies. Off Brazil's coast, the Fernando de Noronha archipelago and the rocky São Pedro and São Paulo archipelago extend South America's presence into the oceanic basin. The South Atlantic grows lonelier. Became the final exile of Napoleon Bonaparte, its isolation chosen precisely because escape seemed impossible. Stark and volcanic, later became a military and communications hub. Farther south, rises abruptly from the ocean, often described as the most remote inhabited archipelago on Earth. Near the southern tip of South America lie the, windswept and geopolitically contested. East of them, subantarctic and the South Sandwich Islands host vast seabird colonies and recall the era of industrial whaling. These islands mark the threshold between the Atlantic and the Southern Ocean, where cold currents and fierce winds dominate. Across all latitudes, the Atlantic's islands share exposure to moving water. The Gulf Stream warms Europe's Atlantic-facing coasts. Trade winds drive currents that carried sailing ships between Africa, the Americas, and Europe. Hurricanes form over tropical waters and often strike island chains first. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation links equatorial heat to polar cold, making islands both beneficiaries and sentinels of climatic change. Geologically, the Atlantic is young and widening. The mid-Atlantic ridge continues to generate new crust. Volcanic islands like Iceland demonstrate active rifting, coral islands like the Bahamas grow atop subsiding platforms, continental islands like Great Britain are remnants of ancient connections severed by rising seas. During the last ice age, lower sea levels expanded many islands and exposed land bridges now submerged. Ecologically, Atlantic islands are laboratories of evolution and vulnerability. Endemic species evolved in isolation on Madeira, the Canaries, and the Azores. Caribbean reefs sustain marine biodiversity yet face bleaching. Subantarctic islands support immense penguin and seal populations. Invasive species have caused extinctions, conservation efforts now seek to restore fragile habitats. Humanly, Atlantic islands have been crossroads. Norse voyagers linked Scandinavia to Greenland. Iberian navigators used Atlantic archipelagos as stepping stones to Africa and the Americas. Enslaved Africans were transported to Caribbean plantations. Indentured laborers from India and Asia followed. Waves of migration flowed outward from Ireland and the Caribbean to North America and Britain. The Atlantic islands have been both points of departure and destinations of forced and voluntary movement. Economically, they have transitioned from plantation agriculture and fisheries to tourism, finance, renewable energy, and scientific research. Politically, they range from sovereign states to overseas territories, some still disputed. Legally, even small islands generate vast exclusive economic zones, granting influence over fisheries and seabed resources. Today, climate change poses existential questions for many Atlantic islands. Rising seas threaten low-lying coral cays. Intensifying storms test infrastructure in the Caribbean. Melting ice in Greenland influences global sea levels and ocean circulation. Yet island communities often lead in adaptation and renewable innovation, drawing on traditions of resilience shaped by centuries of environmental variability. To see the Atlantic through its islands is to understand that the ocean is structured, storied, and alive with connection. From the frozen mass of Greenland to the volcanic ridges of Iceland, from the plantation-scarred yet culturally radiant Caribbean to the lonely peaks of Tristan da Cunha and South Georgia, the Atlantic's islands anchor a world of movement and meaning. They are fragments of continents, summits of underwater mountains, rings of coral built by tiny organisms, and homelands shaped by wind and tide. They have witnessed empire and revolution, exile and return, exploitation and renewal. They stand as markers of tectonic power and as cradles of human culture. In the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, islands rise as punctuation marks in water, giving shape to currents and to history. Together, they form not scattered specks but a continuous narrative, an oceanic archipelago that binds 3 continents and countless peoples in a shared and ever-evolving story. Thank you for watching this video.